Welcome to Webs of Truth with Lindsey and Kat.
I'm Kat Lee, and I'm a spiritual business mentor.
And I'm Lindsey Lockett, and I'm a trauma educator and nervous system coach.
This is an offshoot of our own podcasts. Lindsey is the host of the Holistic Trauma Healing Podcast.
And Kat is the host of the Rooted Business Podcast.
We're stoked to give you a peek into our real conversations because this is the stuff that we talk about all the time when the mics aren't on.
We wanted to share what it feels like to weave conversations through friendship and curiosity with someone you love.
We are nerds about nervous system integration, emotional alchemy, conscious relationships, and the magic found in nature. If you are too, you're going to love these chats. Yay, we're doing this, Lindsey.
Doing it. Welcome to Webs of Truth.
This has been a long-awaited project. I'm
Yeah.
really excited. This is going to be the first of many episodes together. I'm hoping. Fingers crossed. Yay.
Yeah.
The plan is to release one of these every month. And so if you like nerding out about a particular topic with us, each one's going to have a theme. Today's theme is authenticity. And it was inspired by your community, Lindsey. And so we're going to be covering a lot of ground around authenticity. But you had an idea to get us started. So do you want to jump in here and let's play?
Yeah. I think the most natural place to start is sort of answering the question, why do we not live authentically? And I love to refer to Gabor Mate for this. And we have a quote from him, and he says, people have two needs, attachment and authenticity. When authenticity threatens attachment, attachment trumps authenticity. So what comes up for me in my own story whenever I read this quote is my childhood. And in my childhood, I received the message both overtly and covertly that I was too much. And my feelings were too much. My smart mouth was too much. My questions were too much. And so I learned to contort myself in all kinds of different ways to try to not be too much for my parents, because being too much with my stepfather meant I was going to get like verbally abused or physically abused. And being too much with my mother meant I was going to get emotionally abandoned, which for me was far worse than verbal or spiritual abuse, or I'm sorry, verbal or physical abuse. And so I lost that authentic nature within myself that all children are innately born with and is so beautiful. And it's why we love kids so much, is because of their authenticity. But I chose attachment to my parents and caregivers, not consciously. It wasn't like I woke up every day and was like, okay, I really want to be myself, but I can't because my parents won't let me. It was a very unconscious, primal drive to survive, and being attached to my parents was how I got my needs met. And my needs, especially my emotional needs, if I was authentic, were not met by my mother. And so I had to suppress and repress my own authenticity and learn to people please and conform into a version of myself that was more palatable for her, or like easier for her to want to be close to, because that's ultimately what I craved the most. So I truly think that the whole process of the trauma healing journey is really about uncovering all of the things that are not our authentic self and pushing through those layers to find that this is who I really am. Like, love it or hate it, like it or not, whether it's palatable or not, this is who I really am. And part of that includes boundaries and self-protection and self-love and self-trust, and safe reciprocal relationships and community is part of authenticity. Being able to speak one's truth and use one's voice is part of authenticity. Being able to show up in the world however you want to show up, however you want to dress, however you feel the most comfortable. And so, yeah, what do you have to say about authenticity?
Well, I think it's so interesting because I feel like we're two bookends in a way. And it's something that when I zoom out and I look at the clients that I've had over the years, we all carry around a wound of either being too much or not enough. And
Mhm,
and oftentimes it comes with like a little mix of both, which can be like really, really confusing. But I think that when I look at my childhood, a lot of it was around not being enough, rather than being too much.
mhm,
And, you know, I can sit here as an adult who's rationalized and integrated and alchemized a lot of the story and tell you like there's a lot of reasons why, like my parents immigrated from Korea, before we were born. They worked really, really hard. I Their immigration story is really traumatizing. There's a lot in it where I felt like I don't deserve all of this. I don't deserve all this effort that my parents have put in. And so I'm going to be a good girl. I'm going to be perfect. I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure that I earn their love. And they also had really high standards for me, like sort of the stereotypical um, Asian family story of like, you need to get straight A's, you need to be, you know, like excellent at violin, you need to
I was gonna
be.
ask you, did you play the violin?
Yeah.
I'm so
Not only
sorry,
did
that's
I
so
play the violin, but I played in a an orchestra with like a bunch of high schoolers when I was in middle school, and I was the first chair
Mhm,
of my orchestra group at like 12, and everyone else I was playing with was like 16 to 18,
yeah,
And so like there's there's this like theme of like too much, not enough. But ultimately, it comes down to this concept around how do you get your needs met? And this is where I think that it's really important to have a lot of compassion for your own story because, it's so easy to especially at the beginning of the healing journey, like to beat yourself up for being a perfectionist and being like, I should do better, or beat
yeah,
yourself up for being a people pleaser and being like, why am I doing that again? And to me, when I hear that from my friends or my clients, I'm thinking like, you've got a really, really wise little one in there because they figured out a way to make sure that their needs got met. And it's just that that strategy is not really helpful anymore. And so it's not about like abandoning the perfectionist part of you or abandoning the people pleasing part of you and being like, you have to like now be exercised like a demon. It's really more about, hey, like that strategy is not working. Can we do something different? Because as an adult, you no longer have to rely on belonging like so intimately to your family in order to get your needs met. And so like recognizing that you have the capacity and the ability to like meet your own needs.
mhm,
And part of that conversation is you can ask to have your needs met by people you trust. I think that that's something that it took me a really long time to really understand is like being on the side of like not enough. It was really hard for me to start asking for support from people.
yeah,
I imagine on the flip side as well too. But it was really hard for me to start asking for help and support from people because I didn't have a group of people that I felt like I could reliably just like lean on and be like, "Hey, like I just need to vent. Can you just listen to me vent?"
mhm,
Or I'm feeling this particular way, like I just need like a sounding board. Um and so like I went into sort of a hyper independent state at the very beginning of my own healing journey because I didn't have any safe people around me.
mhm,
Um, and so yeah, I think that there's to me the healing journey and the spiritual journey is one and the same,
yeah.
and it's a subtractive process.
We've talked
Um,
about this before.
yeah, and Like, instead of looking at the world and being like, "What can I add to my healing journey? What can I add? Like, what course can I take? What, guru can I follow?" And continuing to look outside of yourself for your own authenticity versus looking within and being like, "Hey, is that a condition, or is that a narrative, or is that a story that I need to release?" And the
Mhm.
more and more and more you're able to like discern and shed some of those old stories and those belief systems, the closer and closer you get to your true self. And that's ultimately what I think we're talking about.
Yeah, totally. It is. And like if I had talked longer, I also have the not enough. My not enough comes from when my mother would not meet my attachment needs, then I would start trying to perform and clean and like show her my straight A report card and all of that. Just throwing spaghetti up against a wall, hoping something would be enough to earn her love and attention back. But then I also have this really complex not enoughness that was put on me by evangelical Christianity, where it was like,
Mm,
as a woman in the church, like there's so many requirements that you have to meet in order to be seen as good and worthy and pleasing to God. And those requirements are taught through scripture. Obviously, it's through modern men's interpretations of scripture, but are taught basically like your heart is wicked above all things. You can't trust it. And like a woman who is gentle and quiet is pleasing to the Lord. And so it's like taking these pieces of our authenticity away and saying, no, that's bad.
mhm,
Like
mhm,
you're bad if you use your voice and you're a woman. You're bad if you wear a bikini and you're a woman. Like you can't dress how you want. You can't speak how you want. You have to be under the submission of God and the church. And then under the submission of another male, whether that male is your father or then your husband.
mhm,
And
mhm.
there's this really weird like transfer of authority where like a woman's authority is her father until she's married, and then her authority is her husband. And
Well,
I know, right? It's so gross. And like uh my authority only ever needs to be myself, right?
mhm,
Like my authority doesn't need to be my father or my mother or my husband or the church or any entity or thing outside of myself. And I think that
mhm,
that's what gets robbed from us when we're raised like you were raised, like I was raised in systems like evangelical Christianity and other fundamentalist religions, where you are literally conditioned to not trust yourself and to look outside of yourself for what you should think, what you should feel, what you should do, what you should wear, how you should act, how you should speak. Um, and yeah, that just it completely like because I was trying to gain attachment with God and Jesus. I was
mhm.
trying to have attachment with the church. I was trying to have attachment with my parents. I was trying to have attachment with like all of these different things, and craving and needing that attachment is not wrong,
Yeah.
right? But as children, you don't have the cognitive ability to be like, wait a second, I don't have to have an authority outside of myself. Like I'm allowed to
Mhm,
have a voice and assert my autonomy and
mhm,
have an opinion and have needs. Like that's okay. That's allowed. No, as children, when we get punished for being too much or not enough and for not measuring up and for sacrificing our authenticity in order to get our attachment needs met, that forms these patterns that are sometimes lifelong. And the unfortunate thing is, I think a lot of people refer to those adaptive survival patterns as personality. And so then as an adult, they're like, well, this is just how
mm,
I am.
mhm, mhm. That is like, oh man, if I can encapsulate just the biggest block around healing, it's the sentence, "This is just who I am." You know? I I remember hearing that from my ex-husband so many times, and it was just like, "Okay, so then I guess we can't work on some of the struggles that we're having in our marriage," you know? And, like, it's a conversation ender, and so, if whether you're having that conversation with somebody else or within yourself, it is like the shutdown of curiosity and ultimately the shutdown of authenticity. Um, I would also say that not just these sort of family systems. And, I grew up in church, but not to the extent that you did. But I would say that for me, a lot of my sort of inauthenticity or authenticity wounds have come from the schooling system. um, I love that you homeschool your children, and that, like, even just now, like we were just talking about how you're creating curriculum for your kid, and you're going to read a Gabor Mate book together and discuss it. And to me, like, there's something about creating your own curriculum that feels um really important. But like,
Mhm.
if you think about what we experience as kids in school, you have to it's such a conditional system. You have to take these classes in order to get to the next class, in order to get to the college that you want to go to, in order to, it's like step by step by step. I mean, even just like, I feel like I am just now starting to understand that I'm not I don't know if I feel like I need to take on the identity or like the label of ADHD.
Mhm.
But I look at that list of symptomology and I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And it didn't work in school. And so I had to adapt and become a very inauthentic version of myself to be successful in school. But we just purchased our property, and I'm looking at all the projects around the on the land, and looking at all the different ways that my brain is like, "Do, do, 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 do," and I'm like, well, this is what my brain was made for. It wasn't
Yeah.
made for school, you know?
Yeah.
And so, like, there's something about these systems that are really asking us to conform in order to find belonging, in order to find validation, that pulls us away from like our own sort of individuation.
Mhm.
And my husband just sent me this video on Instagram the other day, and there was a NASA scientist, and they were trying to assess, like, how can we look for geniuses to join our program when they grow up. And so they had a child psychologist come in, and they had like a sample group of little kids. And they started at age 5. And the way that they defined genius is, can this individual come up with creative solutions to the problems?
Yeah.
And he found that in the cohort of 5-year-olds, 98% of them, he would characterize them as geniuses. And they followed these kids, the same group of kids, all the way up into adulthood. And by the time that they graduated from high school, only 2% of them,
Mm.
he would, characterize them as being geniuses, as defined by his, concept around being able to come up with creative solutions.
Yeah.
And so when I hear that, it's like, it's not like those kids just like came out geniuses and then like lost it on
No,
accident.
that was institutionalized out of them.
Exactly. And to me, when I think about what it is that I do with my clients, and all my clients are spiritual entrepreneurs, and so many of us have come through these institutions, have lived within capitalism, have come from families, have come from, you know, whatever your, cultural mix up kaleidoscope was. A lot of us have been told we have to give our authority to somebody else in order to find success in life. And I think about my work as being like, okay, well, is that true? Can we actually bring that sense of authority, as you were talking about earlier, back to yourself and help you make your own decisions about your own business? Can you show up in a way that's really authentic to you and trust that that is going to land with
Yeah.
somebody, And to me, it's less about, like, of course, I love helping people out with their businesses. And but there's an equal part of me that's like, I love just watching that, like, inner 5-year-old genius come back to life. And to me, it's like, your business, your body, yourself so much better than I'm ever going to know it. And so, like, if we can help you get connected to that, like, people come up with the most creative solutions for their
Mhm.
businesses, and I don't have to tell them anything, you know? And in fact, it would be counter to my work to just tell them like, "Oh, you should do it this way." Um, and it's all about sort of like guiding that work back to yourself within. And I know that that is also, I mean, I you've talked to me like at length about what feel without fear is, and that's the core of it, right? Is it's like
Yeah.
how can you give your own sovereignty back to yourself and reclaim that in a way that like that inner genius 5-year-old gets to just sort of like be so stoked on life.
Yeah. That's absolutely what it is. It really
Mhm.
is about, like, because the I mean, if we think about, if every person listening was to, like, go back and imagine their 5, 6, 8, 10-year-old self, and the things that you were interested in, and the things that lit you up, and the hobbies you had. Like, I used to collect rocks, and, like, I used to I used to make lists of things that I was, like, interested in, and I would make the list in alphabetical order because, again, ADHD, right? But, like, I mean, there's just all these little things that, like, I remember wanting to play volleyball so bad whenever I was in middle school, and I wasn't allowed to because my mom said that that would take time and energy away from my baton twirling, which is what she wanted me to do. And it was all these different ways that, like, I over time learned it's no longer acceptable, and I am no longer allowed to pursue the things that interest me and that I am passionate about or that I would like to learn.
Mhm,
And so my 30s, especially my late 30s, has been like the reclamation of that.
mhm,
And truly giving myself permission to follow what lights me up and to follow um my heart and what my heart wants to do, and reclaiming what Christianity took away from me, which is my ability to trust my heart, and
mhm,
learning that my heart isn't wicked and that my desires are
mhm,
not wicked, that my desires are actually reflections of my authenticity. And so when
mhm,
I don't allow myself to pursue my desires or even to have my desires, then I am participating in the same heartbreaking behaviors that my parents did, that the institutional school system did, that the church did, of like tamping down the child's authenticity and the child's desires and the child's needs and wants and passions and play and fun in order to conform to what?
mhm.
Like, to what?
Yeah.
Like, so that we can be in the 98% of people who don't know how to come up with creative genius problem solving things, like,
Mhm,
and I'm really grateful that you see that in my homeschooling my kids, because what's so interesting to me is that I was a very fundamentalist evangelical Christian when I started homeschooling my kids.
mm,
But and I will admit, there was an element of wanting to protect my kids from the secular world in keeping them at home. But more
mm,
than that, my desire to homeschool my kids came from 2 main places. The first place that my desire to homeschool my kids came from was when my son was 4 years old. I remember thinking, "Oh my goodness, in a year, he could be starting kindergarten." He could be, like, getting up, and I could be packing his lunch and putting his little lunchbox in his little backpack and, like, sending him off to school in a year. And I felt the biggest sense of grief of, like, I can't do that. Like,
mm,
I want my child with me. I don't want to send him off to school at 5 years old. So that was there for me even before I even, like, I didn't know who Gabor Mate was, you know? This was 13 years ago. I didn't know who Gabor Mate was then. So, like, that was my first desire, was like, I wanna still be connected with my child. I don't wanna
mm,
send my kid to school full time when he's 5 years old because I need someone to take care of him. I'm home and can take care of him.
mhm,
My second reason for wanting to homeschool my kids was because it broke my heart to think about them and their high energy and how playful and imaginative they were, sitting at a desk for 7 hours a day, being forced to be still and quiet and not getting to go outside and not getting to learn what they wanted to do, and having to do things like trace letters on worksheets. And like thinking about that and how that would rob my children of their childhood to play and explore and be adventurous also broke my heart. And so it was like, even though I didn't have the language that I have now, there was some authentic part of me that was like, I am going to fight hell and high water to give my kids what I did not have, which is the
Mhm.
ability to be connected to a parent for most of their childhood and the ability to play, explore, follow their hearts, be creative, experiment with things, do silly things, build stuff out of Legos. And that's how we learn, like stuff like that. And so I just appreciate you seeing me for that. And at the same time, like, I feel like that was, even though I didn't know why, other than my own desire, I was making that decision. Now that I know what I know about attachment theory and authenticity, I'm like, that was a parenting win.
Mm.
Like, I was not a perfect mother, but like I would not change that decision. I have no regrets about it whatsoever
Mhm.
because it
Mhm.
fostered my kids' ability to be authentic.
Mhm. I think the piece that I wanna, like, just sort of unpack with you there, because it's so interesting to hear a story of, like, pre-trauma informed Lindsay making a decision that was, I imagine it was hard, I imagine it was a bit controversial.
Oh yeah, David was not totally on board with
Yeah,
homeschooling, and
yeah.
I really had to put my foot down and just say, like, you don't even have to be involved. I'll do it.
Mhm,
Now, over
mhm.
time that changed and
Yeah,
I began to ask for his help and his input, and then he started to enjoy it as well. But at first it really was me standing up for what I desired.
yeah. And, like, I'm hearing that, like, there was a somatic emotional experience that, like, you could not ignore.
Mm,
And and I think that this is where people can sort of get caught up in, like, ideology, is like we can have this, like, homeschool versus, like, systemized school learning. It's like, as a parent, you get to, again, and I think that this is another place where people get their authority and their sovereignty taken away a lot, is like there's so much, well, I do it this way, you should be doing it that way, sort of talk, that I see on the internet when it comes to, like, mothering in particular. I'm not, like, super involved in, like, fathering type of
yeah,
accounts. But I see so much, like, mother shaming because, Susie's not doing it the same way that, like, Pam is doing it, or like Stacy's not doing it the way that, like, it. And so it's about being able to, like, actually sink into what that somatic feeling of desire is within yourself, and being able to make those decisions for you and your family from a place of authenticity, I think, is kind of the key place here. Is like somebody
mhm,
can, a different mother can sit and be like, actually, I do need that time and space away from my kids.
totally.
And, find a program that works for their family. And it is just as legitimate, just as important and authentic as you making the decision to not send your kids away to school.
Yeah,
And, I think that this is where we lose that, I want to say, trust with ourselves. And, it can be about parenting, it can be about business, it can be about relationships. Like, we have so much of us that is trained to, again, like, look outside of ourselves for decision making, for
totally.
um information, instead of being like, hey, like, what does my body want to do with this, with this
Yeah,
decision, and how can I express and communicate my desires, or how can I get those desires met in a way that works for the family.
yeah,
um and to me, like, that's what it all comes back down to, is that authenticity.
yeah. And if I mean, our entire lives is a somatic experience, right? Like the whole thing is a somatic experience, and emotions are simply messengers. They're just the body speaking to us in a language that most of us don't understand how to translate and speak, right? And so at the time that I was deciding to homeschool my kids, I did not have somatic language. I did not know how to feel my feelings and interpret messages and all of that. But like I think a lot of people think like, "Oh, I have this grief coming up. I need to get over this grief so that then I can do the thing." Or I have the anger coming up, so I need to get over the anger and then I can do the thing without going, actually, for me, the grief was not something I needed to get over. For me, the grief was my child and I are not ready to be separated. And the
Mhm,
idea of us separating brings up so much sadness and grief.
mhm,
Um, Whereas like for another mother, like who needs to send her kids to school, she may have an overwhelming feeling of guilt come up,
mhm,
right? It's like, I feel guilty because I need this space from my kids, but I don't know how to honor it without feeling guilty. And
mhm,
so
mhm.
maybe she homeschools out of guilt because she thinks it's what she should do, right? So it's
Yeah,
still not coming from that authentic place of feeling that emotion and noticing the stories that's underneath it and then deciding from a sovereign place, is this story true and do I need to listen to it, or is this story a pattern of survival adaptation?
yeah,
And
absolutely.
if I had felt that grief and then been like, "Oh, well, I just need to get over the grief and then it will be easier to let my kids go." Like, that would have been so inauthentic.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
inauthentic.
mhm.
But for some people, they do need to feel that grief and be able to let something go, right? And so it's
Mhm.
not up to us to decide like, "Oh, well, this is what grief means. It just means you need to feel it and then you can let it go." It's like, no, sometimes you feel grief because your body is saying, "I'm not ready to let something go yet."
Yeah,
And forcing the letting go of it is inauthentic.
yeah.
And there's so much, um, the whole time I was sick in 2018, 2019, like people kept saying, like, you just need to let it go. Like,
Mhm.
just let go of control, just let go of this, let go of that. And I remember Googling, what does it mean to let go? Like, it was such a nebulous concept to me. I was like, okay, all you fuckers are telling me to let it go, but I don't know what you're talking about. And yeah, there's elements of like unintegrated control involved in that. And that, complex PTSD and all of that definitely is involved. But at the same time, I think we praise when people are able to let go. And sometimes they are forced to let go of something before they're actually ready. And then that
Yes.
comes back and it bites them in the butt again because
Yeah.
the body's like, you made me do something I wasn't ready to do yet. You forced
Mhm,
me. And that's not
mhm,
okay. And that was
mhm.
outside of my authenticity.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that this is where, like, emotional optimization and integration is so, so important, and something that I think gets glossed over is, like, I remember I had this idea, like, if I can just let go, then I won't ever have to, like, learn this lesson again, and, like, cool, like, I got that checked off, you know?
Yeah.
And that's not how this work goes. It's like a spiral, and some spirals are gonna continue to be hard. Some spirals are gonna be like, "Oh, like, I've learned that already before, and so it's a little bit easier this time around," you know? Um, but, like, I don't know, I consider myself to be a fairly emotionally secure, trauma-informed, like, all those things. And just this last week, I had a moment with my husband where he was asking for connection in the middle of the day when he had the day off, and he was like, "Hey, like, can we snuggle?" And I had this like, "Ugh, no," like, sort of reaction, and I kinda snapped at him, and I was like, "Oh, that's kind of a unusual reaction from me," and I was like, "I'm just gonna, like, sit with it. I'm sorry I snapped at you, but, like, I'm just gonna, like, let that be." And what came up is, like, he's home from work, but I'm working from home. It would
Mm.
be the same as, like, if I came to him in his workplace and was like, "Can we hold hands while you drive your bus?" Like, you know? And so I was able to talk to him about that, and his like, he was like, "Okay, like, I understand that, but, why did you snap at me? Like, was there a better way that you could have communicated with me?" You know? And my response was like, "Yeah, I think I could have communicated that better with you, and in the future, I'm gonna try to do that." But in the moment, all I knew was like I just needed space, and it was like a need that wasn't being met. And so my authentic reaction in that moment was to snap at you to get my space. And so like we get to have and luckily like I've got a really lovely husband who's accepting of that and is like, yeah, I get that. But oftentimes we shut down that authentic reaction that we have for fear of not being nice or for fear of like coming off like a bitch or,
Yep.
being, characterized as something that we don't want to be characterized as, when that snappiness for me like was actually communicating a real need,
Yeah.
and I think that the theme that I'm sort of tracking in this conversation is authenticity allows you to have your needs met.
Mhm.
And so I think of authenticity as a pathway to having your needs met. And I think that a lot of times people do the opposite, trying to get their needs met, and then confused and conflicted about why they aren't getting their needs met.
Yeah. I think that's such a great example, because I have a lot of clients who, we spend a lot of time in the like world of spiritual enlightenment. And in that world, reactions like snapping are like, oh, how could you calm down and say that in a more grounded way? Like, and I would say that that's like sort of spiritually bypassing over that like very real reaction and need in your body. And like this speaks to how primal and unconscious our nervous system responses are. Because when I hear you say that, I'm filtering it through my lens of what I know about the nervous system. And so I know that it sounds like what you were experiencing when you snapped at your husband was this feeling of irritation,
Mhm.
like that you're irritated that he would even ask that because you are fully in your workday.
Mhm.
And it's irritating to be distracted when you're not in that space, right? Like you're in the flow of your workday. I probably would have reacted the exact same way. And could you develop the ability to notice that irritation and fully feel it in your body and all of that and not snap and just calmly be like, no, Sean, I'm in the middle of my workday. Let's connect later? Like, sure, you could develop that, right? Absolutely, you could. But do you have to? I don't think you do,
Mhm.
because the difference in Sean and someone else is that even if you snap at Sean, he's still safe and he's still there.
Yeah.
And so you're allowed to have that reaction and it not be something that is bad or that you get punished for or that deserves some sort of like isolation or withdrawal of affection and attunement. Like he's still able to give you that affection and that attunement, knowing that like you're not trying to hurt him.
Yeah.
And like I think sometimes that's what we don't give ourselves the space for because we're so used to judging our reactions to things.
Mhm. Mhm.
And yeah, sure, if your reaction is like explosive and you're yelling at him and something like that, like absolutely, that's actually hurting someone else and harming someone else.
Mhm.
But to just be like, ugh, no, like that's not harmful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And there is space for you to exist in that. And your body is letting you know through this irritation, like, I want to be in this flow of doing this work thing over here. And I feel a little bit angry
Mhm.
because it feels like a boundary in my workday is being
Mhm.
crossed
Mhm.
in order to meet this need for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is that what was happening for you?
It was, and I think that the one sort of like correction that I want to make is that like, me being like, ugh, like irritated that he wants to like snuggle in the middle of the day. Literally, like I work here and then the bed is 10 feet that way.
Oh, yeah. So it's
And
your work is in your periphery.
yeah. um And, I think that there is the potential for a loss of connection there. So if we're taking it back to this concept around connection and authenticity, like he has had like past partners who have not been as snuggly as I have. And so he does sort of take that a little bit in a sensitive direction. But I think that in a relationship dynamic where there is authenticity and there is connection, we also have the understanding that there is going to also be rupture and repair.
Mhm.
And so, like, my authentic reaction put a rupture in our relationship. It was a small rupture, but there was a rupture there.
Hmm.
And that rupture was specifically also because he's got a wound around like not being touched enough. And so, like, there it is. There's a rupture in the middle of our relationship and it's sitting there. And so then it's my responsibility, I felt guilty afterwards. I felt guilty at snapping at him. And so I had to sit with that guilt and be like, okay, so what is that guilt telling me? What was that irritated reaction first telling me? And then what was that guilt telling me? And then I could actually go to him afterwards and be like, okay, so here is my authentic story around what that was. And we get to have a shared awareness around that. And in the last week, I didn't realize that this was something that was happening in our relationship too. Like, because he has days off where I'm working and it's a regular occurrence. And I just happened to be on that day, like really super focused. And so, he knows now, and it's been really fantastic in the last week where he doesn't really push up on that boundary anymore because he understands. He didn't understand that before because I didn't fully understand it either. And so I think that like, there's this place where being authentic and like take this as a parable or a metaphor or however you want to take it as a listener, like being authentic actually helped me get my need met on a deeper level, and also preserve the connection between me and my husband. And I think that people are just so scared of that rupture because that's a lot of our wounding in childhood is the
Mhm.
fear of the rupture, that they don't allow themselves to complete that full cycle of
Yeah.
like rupture and then repair.
Yeah. Well, and it also sounds like the work that Sean can do around that is, like I'm going to get my need for connection and physical affection met. I just might not get it met in the exact moment that I want it met.
Yeah.
But the cat's still here,
Yeah.
right? And so that for those of us with any kind of like emotional or physical abandonment, that reassurance that I can't right now, but I will meet this need for you later
Hmm. Hmm.
is really, really important.
Hmm.
And I don't authentically feel like I need to stomp my feet and cross my arms and be like, you have to meet this need for me right now. Like, that doesn't feel authentic to me. That feels like a spoiled brat? But it does feel authentic to be like, this need is still really important to me. And I understand if you can't meet it right now. And I would appreciate the reassurance that you will meet it later.
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
but without that repair or that rupture, you don't get that beautiful opportunity for repair. And the repair actually is what builds more intimacy and helps you understand each other more.
Yeah.
And it makes room for more authenticity in the relationship.
Yes. 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 I think that that's the thing that people don't really understand is that when you and your partner can move through those ruptures and repair them, like I know him so much more intimately and deeply
Mhm.
than any other partner because we've moved through a lot of those. And we've had some big ones too.
Yeah, same.
Um and like you were saying, it creates more room for authenticity, and deeper connection.
Yeah, because then you're reminded of his need for connection and affection.
Mhm.
He's reminded of your need for space to work. And nobody's needs are wrong,
Yeah.
right? Like your needs are not trumping his needs and his needs are not trumping your needs. Like it's still
Mhm.
equitable. And then you just do the delicate dance of like, here's how we need to figure out how to meet both of our needs in the space of this relationship. And that
Yeah.
actually feels a lot more spacious than you having to like stop in the middle of your workday and give him what he wants. And then later you feel resentful because you people pleased and, like that whole cycle, which is not
Yeah.
authentic.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And speaking of
Well,
resentment and business,
yeah,
if
I
if
was
you're
gonna
cool with
say, I
like
feel like this is a good
pivoting.
segue.
Okay, good. Nice. We're on the same wavelength then. Yeah, I was gonna say that I have noticed for several weeks this resentment towards my business and also towards my Instagram audience. And I was feeling really kind of not shut down, but like frozen about it. Like
Mhm.
I want to make some sort of a change, but I don't know what change to make. I felt like my survival needs were threatened, and I kind of that good girl programming and that like that I'm not enough
Mm.
was definitely coming up for me. And so the pattern that I was in, interestingly, was that I was basically like people pleasing my business and people pleasing the internet to try to make my work as accessible and affordable as possible. Because it is a value of mine that this work should be accessible and affordable for people. Like, I truly, truly do believe that. But my efforts to make my stuff accessible and affordable were actually masking this good girl programming, which is
Mm.
crazy and authentic for me, right? Like,
You've
I'm
taught about
not,
this.
yes, I have. I've talked about this a lot. No woman is authentically a good girl. And the good girl is this archetype of uh, woman who tries to be always sweet, always docile, compliant, obedient, nice, serving others, pleasing others, being everything for everyone, trying to prove her worth and her value in order to get love or acceptance or affection or attention or attachment back. And she's overgiving and overserving and really at the expense of her own nourishment, just trying to prove her worth and her value. And that's exactly what I was doing with my business and with the internet is, I mean, it got to the point, Kat, where like people were asking for a payment plan for a $77 workshop. And I was like, okay, sure. Like you can pay it in 2 payments, or like Feel Without Fear is a 4-month payment plan. And we had somebody email and be like, well, I can't do it in 4, but I could do it in 6. Can I do that? And I didn't say yes to that one, by the way. But like it just got to this point where it was like the more accessible and affordable I was trying to make my offerings, the less money I was making. And like the more inauthentic I was being. And it was at the expense of my own nourishment. And so feeling this like stuck feeling of resentment about it and then getting underneath that, it was like, oh, I'm trying to prove by giving away all of this free and really cheap stuff, I'm trying to prove my worth and my value so that people will want to buy the more expensive paid stuff. Like I'm trying to prove to you, if this is what I'm giving you away for free, if this is what I'm giving you for so low cost, imagine what's inside my paid containers.
I mean, that's explicitly what a lot of business coaches tell people to do too.
I know. And that's so not authentic for me. And at one point it did feel authentic for me. I would say in the very early stages of my business, like that is a pretty normal thing to do is you kind of
Mhm,
have to get yourself established, right? And you
mhm,
do that by providing really valuable free content. But
mhm.
I've done that and I'm on year 4 of my business at this point, and my business is not a baby like on the tit anymore. My business is a teenager, and the internet doesn't know about this, but you do, but I'll share. In this pattern of feeling resentment and burnt out and all of that, I sent messages to 2 separate friends where I literally said, I feel like a cow that's been milked and milked and milked, and I have nothing left to give. But if I don't keep letting myself be milked, I won't be nourished. And I shit you not, the next day I woke up and my right breast was like tender, painful, hard, and hot. And I remember texting you being like, what would a Chinese medicine practitioner do about this? But really my body was just, it was finally like, I came to the realization in a mental way, and the unconscious became conscious. I feel like a cow that's been milked and I have nothing left to give. The next day, my body responded with a manifestation of a physical symptom of literally like a clogged duct or like mastitis or like, and I haven't nursed a baby in 18 years. So I don't have any other explanation for that other than my body was like, yes, bitch, you finally got it. This is how I feel. And so just in the last few days, like I've taken all of this action because I found my anger about it, and I figured out how to channel my anger into like making a really clear boundaries post on my account and pinning it to the top of my account about like,
Mhm,
here are my boundaries for this space, and if you don't like it, you need to unfollow me.
mhm,
Making another really, really clear post that I pinned to the top of my account about how, yes, I do believe that this work should be accessible and affordable, but I, as a human, am not in such a space of energetic, emotional, and financial overflow that I can make that possible for everyone. And so, if you are in a really tough spot financially and your basic needs are not met, not only can I not help you, but it would be irresponsible of me to try to help you because you need to get your basic needs met, and I can't help you do that.
Mhm.
And if you are in a space of my work feels expensive for you and it's out of your budget right now, but you have other extras in your life like Starbucks, or you get your snatch waxed, or you get manicures and pedicures, or like whatever, then it's your responsibility to come up with creative ways to afford my work. It's not
Mhm.
my responsibility to create all these custom payment plans and discounts and this and that, because that is what leads to the resentment and the burnout.
Yeah.
And it's me trying to prove myself. And
Mhm.
like, realizing that and letting myself feel the full emotional wave of the burnout, the resentment, and then that mobilizing into anger, channeling the anger into taking healthy action that establishes boundaries and protects my energy and my nourishment. Like, it was like a switch flipped so quickly. And I ended up like 10 people joined my program that day.
Mhm.
Like, it was me who wasn't embodying my authenticity. It wasn't that people weren't getting what my offering was about or that they weren't understanding it. I think the energy of being in that desperate people pleasing, like, please meet my needs, please meet my needs, please say I'm worth it, please see my value. Like, that is a really repelling energy. And it's not
Mhm.
who I authentically am. And so as
Yeah.
soon as I spotted it and shifted my energy, it like opened up for nourishment to come in a way that it had not been coming in. And it was
Mhm.
completely my responsibility and within my authenticity to do that.
Mhm. Yeah. And I would also say too that having walked next to you through that, um, again, it's these interesting spirals that our bodies and our lives, our souls take us on. Is we were having a conversation and you said the sentence, "I'm not allowed to feel resentful towards my business."
I did say that.
And and I pinned that in my mind. And and I was like, "Oh, that's a curious thing to say." Um, and then you started talking about feel without fear, and like you were just going off about how if people could just feel into their feelings and not be afraid of any of their feelings, and they could really get down into what the root core of their feelings are, that's going to relieve so much suffering in the world. And I know how important this work is, and I know how you were on this roll.
And you're like, take your own medicine, Lindsay.
But I mean, this is why we teach what we teach, is because we're not immune to it. We
No.
continue I snapped at my husband last week. You felt like you couldn't feel into your resentment. Resentment was not a safe emotion for you. And we continue to go on these spirals and these journeys. And to me, that makes, if I'm on the receiving end of being in your audience or being a client of yours, like you're a safer person
Mhm.
because you are authentic about the process that you're in and continue to be in all the time. You're not coming at it from this guru status of well, I figured it all out, and you should feel without fear because you should, you know, do it the way that I did it.
Yeah.
No, it's you are actively integrating and learning these lessons as you're
Mhm.
teaching them. And I know that for myself, oftentimes if I land on a concept to teach about, universe is going to bitch slap me
Oh,
with that
totally.
same lesson and
Totally.
be
Yeah.
like, "Hey, if you really want to lead people on that journey, you got
Buckle
to
up.
figure this piece out." Yeah.
Yup. Yup. I'm curious because just this year you totally changed your business name and like did new colors and everything else. You went from empowered curiosity to it actually being your name.
Mhm.
And like, I cannot imagine that that didn't involve another level of, like, uncovering authenticity and then stepping into that and embodying that.
Mhm. Yeah. The name change was interesting because, well, I think it hits on 2 things for me. I talk about commitment. I'll reference the episode in my show notes here, because I can't remember the number of it. But I talk about how my business went through a contraction period where, like, literally everything dried up. I was doing all the quote unquote right things, and I was able to pay all my bills. I was able to pay my employees, but, like, I could not pay myself for a couple of months. And, like, I really think about signs and symptoms from the body as being storytellers and messengers, just like your boob was trying to tell you, hey, like, we're kind of fucking tired of giving milk away for free.
Yep.
Um, and and I think that businesses are the same. There's signs and symptomology, and instead of looking at the signs and symptoms as something that's broken that needs to be fixed, I've trained myself to look at them and be like, okay, so, like, what are you trying to communicate with me here? And sometimes the only sign and symptom that my business can show me is by going through a contraction,
Mhm.
because I'm either not listening or I haven't quite learned that lesson. And so we went through a contraction period, um, last winter. And what came out of it is this, like, deep understanding that I haven't fully committed to my business. Like, I was still thinking of it as, like, we're dating, like, we're seriously dating, but, like, I'm not, like, married to this, right? Um, and part of that comes from my own family conditioning. Of the women in my family have always told me, like, keep a door open. Like, you always need to have an exit plan. You always need to be
Mm.
independent. You always need to have the ability to, like, extract yourself from any sort of situation. And so my exit plan for my business was to not call it my own name and to not attach my name to it, because I had gone through an experience with Kathleen Lee Acupuncture. When I sold that, it was a really, really hard business to sell because my name was attached to it.
Mm.
And so I was thinking, well, if I ever want to sell Empowered Curiosity, I want it to be essentially marketable for someone to take in and take over. And what I realized is that there's so much of myself that's built into my business that even if I, like, stopped at doing this thing, that business would die with it.
Yeah.
It's not a thing that somebody can just come in and take over and
Yeah.
be like, I'm going to do this in lieu of cat. Um, and so that was reason one for changing the name of my business, because I felt like my business was saying, like, can we get fucking married yet? Like, I feel like I'm in and you aren't fully in. So um and so to me, like, taking on my name felt like a commitment ceremony.
Mhm.
Um the other piece is that my name, specifically my whole name, has been a source of shame. So my name is Kathleen Ho Lee. Um, my parents, being Korean and not really understanding, naming semantics, gave me the middle name Ho, because in Korean my name is HoSoo. And
Mm.
so they were like, well, just take the middle initial of her name and put it in as the middle name of her English name. And the word Ho also has significance in Korean. And so, like they were, like, bestowing me this middle name in honor in my English name. And as you can imagine, it was a source of, like, a lot of teasing growing up,
Yeah.
and a lot of very confused looks on, teachers' faces when they would call my name for the first time in class. And so I really sort of just, like, divorced myself from my middle name, um, for a very long time. And this last year has been a big journey in, asking my parents a lot about the Korean culture, a lot about the lineage. My parents are also just a bit unusual in that, like, they they too, I don't think I realized how much they too have had to straddle two worlds. Like to me, they've always felt very, very Korean, but they've moved back to Korea now and they don't fully fit in with like Korean Koreans. And so now they have their own community of like expat Koreans who are just like them, where like, Koreans who have moved to the States in their when they were in their early 20s and have moved back now in retirement. And so they have this nice little community where they get to feel like they belong. But I don't think I had fully realized like how outside of you know American and Korean culture they felt too. And so this year has been like a deep exploration in like, can I just own both sides of myself, which is the Korean side and the American side? And to me, growing up Korean in a mostly white community, I've always felt like, and also it feels weird for me to say this out loud, but like have also like created situations where I'm the token Korean or the token Asian kid.
Mm,
Um, because I felt like I could find better belonging in that space. And um and so to me, calling my business Kathleen HoSoo Lee is like a reclamation of um like and just sort of being unapologetic of, both sides of my cultures.
yeah,
And so
which
it's
is
I
a
mean,
reclamation of your authenticity.
yeah, yeah. And it's gonna continue to unfold because I don't know that I'll ever fully understand what it means to be Korean.
Mhm.
If my parents are having trouble sort of assimilating back into Korean life, like, um, it's it's, yeah, it's definitely gonna be a journey, but it's something that feels really important for me to figure out, like, and accept, like, where I am and the space that I occupy within these 2 cultures.
Hmm, yeah,
But
it's a
yeah.
big journey.
Yeah, and I'm definitely not done yet. Well, that
Yeah.
one's gonna be a lifelong one, I think.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And
Yeah.
I similarly I mean, I don't have the Korean complexity built into my story at all, but I also had a lot of shame about my name, Lindsey Lockett, growing up because,
Mm,
uh, Lockett is my biological father's name, and, um, like, when my mom divorced him and then remarried, and we moved to this very small cliquey town, um, it was very taboo to be from a divorced home, and
mhm.
so if my last name was different from my mom's last name, or like I had a stepbrother who was 2 grades younger than me, so we went to the same school, and so if my last name was different from his last name, then kids would know that we were from a broken home, and I felt really self-conscious about that,
Yeah.
and so I just decided that I would take on my stepfather's last name.
Mm,
Even though he legally didn't adopt me, I would just say, like, "This is what I wanna be known as." And, um, yeah, it was only in, like, 2020 when I finally had this realization that, like, I had been trying to assume this other identity in order to fit in,
mhm,
and that when my soul was, like, put on this planet, my soul chose my parents, who they were, and the name Lindsay Lockett, and, like, that was the name my soul came here to be, and I'd been running from it for my whole life, and I had felt ashamed and embarrassed of it my whole life, and I my legal last name is my partner's last name, but more and more people are knowing me by Lindsay Lockett instead of his last name, and that's how I introduce myself now even. I'm not sure if I'll have it legally changed back. I mean, it still says Lockett on my birth certificate, but I'm not sure if I'll ever legally have it changed back, like where it's on my driver's license and my passport and all of that. It feels okay to be known as Lindsay Lockett. Um, online and in my circle of friends, that feels really good. And the reclamation of like, this is who my name authentically is. And I don't
yeah,
have to hide this anymore. And I
yeah,
don't have to feel ashamed or embarrassed about it anymore. And
yeah,
the more I've allowed myself to have that name, the more I'm like, it's so cute that my mom chose a name with like this alliteration, like
mm,
alliterative names are so cute, I think. And
yeah.
I'd literally never felt that until I was like 38 because all through grade school, it was like I just was like, "Oh, I feel so embarrassed about this name." Like,
Yeah, yeah.
so I just think it's really powerful that we've both in the last few years reclaimed like our true names as part of
Mhm.
embodying that authenticity more.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I love that. I don't think I knew that your legal name was David's, because I just know
Yeah.
you as Lindsey Lockett, you know?
I don't like telling people on the internet what it is because I like to maintain my privacy.
Um, I think there's one more piece that I wanna sort of play with. I imagine that this is something that'll, resonate with both of our audiences, is I often get this question of, like, how can you be so authentic online? Like, how can you be so
Mhm.
vulnerable? How can you, like, share all of your personal things? And so I'd love to hear how you would answer that question.
Yeah, I get that question a lot too. In fact, I have 2 DMs sitting in my, uh, inbox right now that are flagged of women who've said, "Could you please do a podcast on being authentic online?" Please,
You can
because
send
they
them
say
this one.
yeah, because they say the same thing about me is they're like, "How do you do this? How do you show up so authentic? How do you just speak your truth and say whatever's on your mind and have these hot takes and you're so bold about it and unapologetic and like how?"
Mhm,
And my answer to that is like at this point, I don't know that I could give somebody a like, well, start here and then do this and then do this and then do this. Like I don't think I could distill it down into any kind of linear process in that way.
mhm,
But at the same time, I would say that I feel like you get to a point where you have uncovered enough of your authenticity and it feels so good and so satisfying and so nourishing to be in your authenticity that it really isn't a choice anymore. It's just
mhm.
how you show up. Like, I don't wake up in the morning and go, I wonder what is the most vulnerable post I could make today? Like, that's not what I'm thinking about when I'm creating content. I'm just creating whatever's coming up for me or whatever feels relevant to my offer or
Yeah.
whatever I'm processing at that time or whatever.
Mhm,
And I'm just no longer afraid of using authentic, vulnerable language or authentic, vulnerable expression and that being seen. I'm not afraid of it anymore. So it's not really a choice of like, okay, I'm going to be authentic and vulnerable. It's like people ask, how can you do this? It feels so hard. And to me, it doesn't feel hard because authenticity is the most natural thing in the world.
yeah, yeah, I love that.
It's harder to pretend to be someone you're not, and it's harder to pretend to like to hide and to make yourself more palatable and to censor. Like to me, that is harder than
Mhm,
just being like, okay, world, here's me, here's who I am, and like
mhm.
sometimes I'm gonna get this wrong, and that is it's gonna be okay.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I think that that's where, like, people are just so scared of the rupture, where they don't allow themselves to be authentic, and, like, that's one of the things that you've taught me as a friend, is to, like, not be
Mm.
scared of the rupture from the internet, because the internet is, like, as much as we try to create, these, I still call my people my community, because I feel like I'm small enough where there's reciprocity there. Um, but I'm feeling that sort of stretch even in my space, where the reciprocity is going to feel unbalanced, like, pretty quickly.
Mhm.
And so, like, I think that when we're so scared of that rupture, because we're being told by other people out there, like, hey, like, in order to be a successful online coach, you need to have as many followers as possible. And so then the intentionality shifts and changes away from, I really want to connect and I really want to be authentic and I really want to sort of share from my heart, and shifts into, I have to figure out ways to get more followers. Like, that's
Mhm.
that's a huge, huge sort of, like, leap in intention.
Mhm.
And and to me that's a pretty hard leap, and something that I try to lead people back into is like, hey, like it's okay to have ruptures even on the internet because your
Mhm.
people will find you. It's actually going to help your people feel more safe.
Yeah.
Um, I think for me, when I think about showing up authentically and showing up vulnerably online, I still have a pretty hard boundary around I share things that I feel in regulation about. And so
Mhm.
I do a lot of my processing with my inner circle, whether that's my husband or Andre, who's my best friend, or Cheech, who's my other best friend, or you. Like, I do a lot of that within my inner circle. And so
Yeah.
by the time I share something online, while it is vulnerable and it is authentic, it is not coming from a place where I need something from my audience
Right.
and I'm needing them to take care of me because I get that care taken care of, like through my own personal reciprocal relationships where there is like a strong culture of reciprocity.
Yeah.
Um, because if I go looking for that on the internet, that's gonna be a well that can never get
Yeah.
tapped, you know. Um, and so I think that that's where people get a little bit confused is like we have to have our needs met outside of the internet so that we can show up as coaches online and give. And when that balance becomes upset, that's where we sort of go into the resentment space. And we have to
Yeah.
like also like guard that space, pretty intimately so that we don't flip into like overgiving and, the experience that you had this month of like feeling resentful.
So, yeah, I
Yeah.
have this reel that has had like over 800,000 views at this point, and it's just literally me in my car, and I was having some abandonment stuff come up, but I felt like it was like I wasn't able to totally access it. And so, something that I do is I use music to evoke emotion or to amplify emotion so that I can like feel it fully. And so, I was playing this song that was bringing up a lot of sadness and grief and also that like familiar feeling of abandonment. And so the reel is literally just me in my car listening to this song and crying, and then I put a caption over it that was about like complex PTSD and emotional abandonment and how it feels like even though I logically know I'm not being abandoned, it still feels triggering to me.
Hmm.
And I got so many comments, which I know people are so well-meaning and they're so kind and I appreciate it so much. But people were like, "Oh, Lindsay, it's going to be okay. Just hang in there. You've got this." Like, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I find it so interesting how I wasn't sharing that post to get support from my audience.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't need people to say, "Hang in there, you've got this. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna pass. It gets easier." Like, I already know all of that, right? Like, the only reason I'm able to share something like that is because I feel so safe in holding myself through something like that.
Mhm.
And what I wish I could, like, blast out to the internet is, like, the compassion and the empathy, the sympathy that you feel for me, direct it toward your inner child.
Yeah.
Like, because I've got me and I have community like my husband and my friend Honor and you and other friends. Like, I have people that if I really need somebody to tell me it's going to be okay, you've got this. You've gone through this trigger before, you're going to get through it again. Like, if I needed that kind of encouragement and support, I already have people who give that to me. So I get that people like they want to offer compassion and I appreciate it so much. But at the same time, I'm also like, it does make me pause before I share videos like that because I'm like, some people are going to perceive this as me being dysregulated and asking for sympathy.
Mm.
And I'm not. Like,
Mhm.
I've already integrated this experience by the time I've posted about it.
Yeah.
I've just gotten so usually comfortable with feeling my feelings and facing them without fear that it's not hard anymore for me to turn a camera on when I'm in the middle of a hard moment. But I have, for every one time I turn the camera on, I have 9 other times when I don't.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think that's really important to name too is that part of my authenticity is that there are sacred private things that I keep to myself and that I don't feel like I need to share with the internet.
Mhm.
And that's part of my own processing. But yes, to what you're saying about showing up dysregulated and needing the caretaking of your audience and all of that, like that doesn't feel good for me either.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing that I'm finding, and to me, I think of everything being a spiritual practice. And so I'm going to view it through that lens. But like social media this year in particular has been an interesting spiritual practice because I'm starting to learn that like there's a discernment piece around being dysregulated about sharing and then the subject that I'm actually sharing about.
Yeah.
Because I used to feel pretty dysregulated about the sharing piece in general. I'm a pretty I think people are oftentimes surprised to hear that I'm an introvert. Like I am a hermit to my core. And um and so, like, even just sharing things was a hard thing for me of like being seen, especially as somebody who grew up in a space where, the not enoughness story meant that I had to blend in. I had to be sort of like, gray and like not stand out. Um, and, and so I had to do a lot of work around just being able to share.
Yeah.
But once I was able to integrate that piece, I found that the discernment around what I share got a lot more clear. And
Hmm.
so, while I too can't give you a stepwise sort of like we do this and this and this, I'll say too that like I have a pattern in a lot of my clients where a lot of us carry around this wound around being seen.
Yeah.
And so, like, that feels like a really good first step to play with and try to understand and unpack. And everyone's a little bit different, which is where I think that having a close, trusted confidant, a friend, a partner, a coach is so important to help you. Because oftentimes it's so hard to, like, whenever I hear that story of like, I have trouble being seen, it's like, oh, you actually have trouble seeing yourself.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think
Hmm.
that that's a good place to start for
Yeah.
anybody who's sort of in that space, like wondering, well, how can you be so authentic? How can you be so vulnerable? It's like, well, let's start with you, like, how
Yeah.
do you see yourself?
Yeah. So I'm gonna share a juicy confession.
Okay.
Like it may really surprise you. It may really surprise our listeners to hear this from me. I actually do not like being watched. It's not that I'm
Mm,
afraid to be seen. I don't like being watched. Here's what I mean. I grew up as a competitive baton twirler. I started at the age of 6. Baton twirling is kind of like ice skating. It's a very expensive solo sport. And there's lots of costumes and shoes and equipment and traveling and coaching and like all of that. I did not receive any of that through my school. It's not a school sport the way that
yeah.
a lot of, it's not a team sport. So, my mom cleaned houses in order to afford to be able to pay for my lessons and my costumes and the traveling and the competition entry fees and all of that. And then when you compete as a twirler, you are the only one performing and there is a panel of judges watching you. And they're literally sitting there with like they have like it's a judge and then their assistant and the assistant has like a score sheet and the judge is watching and every time you drop your baton, every time you don't point your toe, every time your free hand is like out of place, every time your leg isn't straight when you do a kick or a leg hold or something like that, they make a note to the assistant. So like you can actually see them as they're judging. You drop the baton and the judge looks or says to the assistant without even turning her eyes to the assistant, the judge says drop, drop, drop. And so every drop is marked. And that's part of the score. Every time your toe's not pointed, it's marked. Every time your leg is bent, it's marked. Like all of these different things. And so then depending on the difficulty, like that's noted, the lack of difficulty, how it could have been more difficult, like all of this is noted and then it's scored against other competitors. And then whoever scores the highest is who wins in that age and ability group. So what comes up for me when people watch me in something that I'm not feeling completely like polished in or an expert at or comfortable in I feel really like scared. Emotions is not something I feel scared about. So when I am watched in a vulnerable emotional moment, that does not feel scary to me because I feel at this point like very emotionally intelligent and can hold myself and aware and like all of that. But if you and I were to go to a bar and be like, let's do karaoke, like I would have such a hard time doing that. And it's not because I'm trying to be a great singer or whatever. It's because I don't like being watched.
Mm,
Same thing in the bedroom. I don't like being watched
mm,
because it's not totally something that I feel is like polished and I'm an
mm,
expert at and all of that.
mhm.
So like I'm saying that to offer that some people, because of their own projections, if they're not comfortable with their own emotional expression and vulnerability, they're going to be really uncomfortable with other people's emotional
Yeah,
expression and vulnerability.
yeah, yeah.
But like, if you're uncomfortable with your own singing voice, for example, then you're not going to show up and do karaoke because you're afraid that there's going to be all these other people who are way better than you and you're not going to measure up
Mhm,
the way that I was with twirling. So I just kind of wanted to offer that little bit of complexity that like there are certain things that it is so easy for me to be like, yeah, I can be seen here. I can be seen crying or being angry on the internet. That is not hard. But even like the sensual dancing that I do, I post that on the internet, but I've only done it live in front of my husband once.
mm,
And when I do it on a video, I can clip off the parts that I don't like.
mm,
I can edit it
mhm,
to
mhm,
only post what feels good to post.
mhm, mhm,
One time I danced for my husband, I couldn't even make eye contact with him
mm,
because it felt so uncomfortable and vulnerable. And like, what if I mess up? And is he judging me? Like, so I don't know if you want to go and do anything with that or not. But like, I just wanted to say that like, I am not comfortable being seen in everything, but I
yeah,
am in when it comes to emotional expression.
yeah. I mean, I think the only place where I wanna take that is, like, when we see each other in person, you know I'm gonna ask you for a dance.
I feel so scared about that. Oh, seriously.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to a Halloween party. It's an annual Halloween party every year. We enter the costume contest every year. This will be our fourth year to do the costume contest, and we won once. And they have karaoke there every year. And every year, I'm like, I'm going to do karaoke this year. I'm going to do it. And every year, I chicken out. And so
Mm.
I've actually been practicing my karaoke song in the car
Oh.
to try to like, psych myself up about
Yeah,
doing karaoke this year. And I still don't know if I'm actually going to do it,
yeah.
but I will try really hard to dance for you if I can. I
To
probably
the
won't make eye
extent
contact.
that you feel safe. Yeah.
Well, but that's the thing though, is like, even if I don't feel safe, it is a good opportunity to like widen my window of tolerance to doing something uncomfortable in a safe environment and with
Mhm.
a safe person.
Yeah.
Which sometimes that's how we learn to embody our authenticity is by dipping our toe in the water with a safe other person, letting ourselves be seen a little bit. And then that becomes a little bit more familiar.
Yeah.
And then it still feels scary, but then we keep trying. And like eventually it doesn't become as hard as it was whenever we first started.
Yeah.
So maybe that's my other tip for people who are wanting to be more authentic online is like you got to dip your toe in the water at some point.
Mhm.
You got to try at some point. That doesn't mean you have to show up like doing imagined reprocessing of anger at your mother. Like you don't have to start there. But
Yeah.
like maybe you start with like sharing part of your story that feels really tender
Yeah.
or whatever, but like eventually you do it enough times that it desensitizes you to any shitty comments that people leave or um I can't stop people even though my intention is not to get caretaking from my audience. I don't need that need met because I have people in my life who do that for me.
Mhm.
But I can't help it that people are going to do that anyway.
Yeah.
And so I just have to keep doing my stuff and it gives people the bravery to do that with themselves. And hopefully it helps people see like you can do scary things on the internet and they're not actually as scary as you think they are. You've got a story that's making it much bigger than it actually is.
Yeah.
Which is the same thing with dancing in front of my husband, right? Like he's not going to divorce me if I like don't do a perfect sexy dance in front of him, you know? Like what the fuck am I actually afraid of?
Yeah.
I'm afraid of being judged like I was judged as a
Yeah.
twirler and not
Yeah.
performing up to the standard.
Yeah. I don't know what the equivalent of this would be for you or for anybody else who's listening, but I came from a very similar sort of like background of being in fiddle competitions and being in like violin competitions. And same thing, it's like you hit like a flat F and they count that against you.
Yep.
Um, and quite honestly, the thing that helped me work through that was roller derby, because I
Mm.
chose a sport, not consciously, but I chose a sport where it's like you can't fucking plan every single move and you're gonna fall and you're gonna mess up and there's a lot of things that are outside of your control. Um and so I don't know if like finding some sort of expression where the expectation is that you're gonna mess up and that you're not gonna do it perfectly. um, like I found that to be helpful for me in my own journey of like being watched. And like towards the end of playing roller derby, I had to quit because I had to stop getting injured. But like towards the end, the integration that I found was like I actually really loved playing in bouts and like being seen and watched, like in that space. So
Mm.
there was, but again, like that slow stepping into it and having those disconfirming experiences. And the first game I played, I was just like terrified and frozen and could not move. Um, and like over time, your nervous system starts to learn, like, oh, actually, it's safe. Like you're gonna be okay. Like you will not die. Your husband will not divorce you. Um, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, me doing the sexy dance for him, he's like, "Fuck yeah, this is awesome. I don't
right.
care what you do." Right? Like, he doesn't care, but in my head, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, like, my legs feel so shaky, and, like, what if I don't, do this right or whatever?" And right now, I'm currently choreographing my own, uh, dance for my winter recital for my dance school, and, coming up against the same things is like,
Love it.
what like I don't wanna make it too easy because then it's not challenging, but I don't wanna overextend myself and make it too hard, and then I can't, like, practice it enough to get it, but I have to perform it live because I'm going to strip cabin with my dance teacher and other people in the class, in Tennessee at the beginning of December, and, like,
Mm.
I have to perform this on a stage in front of all the people there live. Like, I don't get to edit anything. I don't get to just take the clips that are the really good parts of me and leave out the parts that aren't very good. So that feels really, really scary.
Well, I just love this for you because I follow your dance teacher Lux, and
She's
like
awesome.
she seems like a very very safe like
Oh, yeah.
celebratory person. So like this is going to be the perfect thing. And this is what I mean is like when you have a need and you have a desire, actually this I would consider this to be a desire to like work
Yeah.
through a particular pattern, right? Um when you have that desire, you as an adult have the capacity and ability to sort of design the right experience to set yourself up for success, whereas we
Yeah.
didn't have that as children. And
Correct.
so you get to, in your adult life, create experiences where you are more likely to be authentic than not.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an important part of this healing journey is like recognizing that you do have a lot more power than you give yourself credit for.
Yeah.
And um and that in that power, if you can reach into those spaces that help you feel authentic, like
Hmm.
whether that's through experiences or people or relationships, like take this however you want to take this as a listener. But yeah, I'm celebrating you over here and I can't wait to hear
Thank
about it
you.
afterwards.
Thank you. I'll probably send you the video.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think one other thing that might be just a point of interest in all of this is that I find that it is easier to show up authentic, like truly, fully authentic sometimes on the internet more than in my real life relationships
Mm.
because for
There's more
me,
at stake.
there's no attachment at risk on the
Yeah.
internet. Like I'm not sacrificing my authenticity online so that I can retain the attachment of my followers or my audience. Like I don't have an attachment relationship with the internet. I do have an attachment relationship with David and with you and with other people in my life. And so sometimes that's actually where it's harder
Mhm.
for me to show up authentic because there feels like there's more at stake. And it feels like I might be risking attachment in order for me to be authentic.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I can see how it goes both ways. Like some people have a struggle being authentic, period. Some people, like they've got a few people in their real life they can be authentic with, but being authentic online feels like the big scary monster under the bed. And, in my case, being authentic online is easy at this point. Being authentic in my relationship with David is easy at this point. With you, it's easy at this point. I have a couple other relationships where it's not always easy. And the good news is that they're safe enough that like I can talk through that with them and be
Yeah.
like, hey, here's where I wasn't being authentic because I was afraid of this,
Mhm.
or I felt like I couldn't say this or
Mhm.
whatever. So
But I mean, even in our relationship, I feel like we've worked through a lot of spaces where like you're like, is it okay for me to be this big? Like, am I allowed to take
yeah.
up space in this way? And, you know, I'm the kind of person where like just I want and crave connection that feels authentic. And so I'm like, yeah, girl, take up all the space you want, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, you're the only you and David are the only people who've ever told me in my entire life, like, I love your bigness.
Mm,
Like, I've only heard that from you and David. And it means so much to hear that because yeah, it really does mean a lot. Because my mom even used to tell me up until in the last couple of years, like my whole married life with David, and we've been together for 22 years. And she would regularly say, you better make sure you keep him around because he's the only one who will put up with you.
mm,
And that, like, it just cemented to me over and over and over, you're too much, you're too big, like, you're too needy, you take up too much space, and he's the only one that will ever put up with you. And so just that made me get smaller and smaller and smaller. And
yeah.
it's only been in the last like 5 years that I've started like, and I don't see myself as a big person. Like I don't look at myself and go, "Oh, you are so big and you have such big energy." And like I don't see that in myself. It's just like this is how I am and I understand that for some people that does come across as really big. But I also have a calling to do really big work in the world. And so like I need an energy that can match the work that I'm called to do in the world. Otherwise, my work will just overwhelm me if I don't have a big enough energy to match it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my dear, thanks for having this conversation with me. I'm really
Yeah, that
excited to
was
put it out.
fun. That
Yeah.
was fun. That was our first
Yay.
Webs of Truth episode.
Yay. And there's
We
going to be
spun we
lots
spun a
more.
lovely web.
Yeah. I mean, I love the name of our I guess sub podcast. Is that what we're calling this?
Our
Because
sure, our
our
our offshoot podcast.
yeah, because I feel like our conversations do kind of have this like webby,
Yeah.
sort of we don't have a linear thought process. You put two people with ADHD together
People with
there's not
ADHD and tons of awareness and tons of curiosity and tons of emotional intelligence, like, yeah, that is not gonna be a conversation that goes in a straight line for
yeah.
sure. We just keep spiraling around
Yeah.
to things and getting deeper and deeper and deeper.
Well,
Yeah.
thanks for being here and we'll put a
You
new one out
too.
next month.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
are. Do we remember what our topic is about next month?
I think I named it and then I can't remember what my squirrel brain forgot.
Okay, that's okay. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed our first Webs of Truth episode.
Alrighty. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening.
So, Lindsay, how can people find you?
I'm on Instagram at I am Lindsey Lockett. My website is lindseylockett.com, and that's with an EY, not an AY. And you can listen to my podcast, Holistic Trauma Healing, anywhere that you listen to podcasts. Where can people find you, Kat?
So my Instagram is where I hang out the most. That handle is cat.hosoo.lee. My website is cathosoolee.com, and my podcast is the Rooted Business Podcast. And just like you can find it anywhere.
We'll see you next time.